Agricultural drainage is a contentious issue in this province. I can tell because it's been very difficult to get anyone from a governing body willing to do a live interview with us. The stakes are high, the profit margins are thin, and some farmers want to make every inch of their land as productive as possible. And in some cases, that means redirecting water downstream. But what happens when you're the neighbor who's downstream? And what is the environmental impact of draining wetlands? Today on Blue Sky, we'll dig into the messy world of agricultural drainage and illegal ditching. We'll hear from people who are concerned that the Water Security Agency just isn't doing enough to enforce existing laws. We'll hear from a researcher who is looking at the consequences of draining wetlands. And we want to hear from you. Have you seen illegal ditching where you live? If you've reported someone, what was that process like? Call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Sandy Lowndes is on a mission. The Kelvington area farmer wants the provincial government to crack down on illegal drainage, and she's worried about wetlands in her area. She was part of a group that recently went to the legislature to raise their concerns about what she's seeing and how the Water Security Agency deals with complaints from people like her. And she's on the line now to tell us more. Sandy, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you.
So what exactly is happening at your property?
Well, my land is downstream from a bunch of people that ditch illegally and or with a permit. And I recently got a package in the mail from the local Kelvington C&D board, and it had easements in it. And the easement said that we want to be able to flood your land, submerge your land, take all your trees down along the creek and along runs. We want to construct on your land. We want you have to then expect all the responsibility and the liability for anything we do on your land, and we're going to do it for $1. And if you don't sign the easement, then we have the power to expropriate your land from you.
I assume that you've responded to them and said that you're not in favor of this?
Oh, yes. I've said I'm not signing the easement.
So, I mean, you talked a little bit about legal and potentially illegal. So people can be draining upstream from you legally. Do you have a problem with that?
Well, yes, I have a problem if it's still negatively impacting me. And the Water Security Agency, I mean, they use the word security in their name to sort of imply that they're looking after the water. And they aren't. They are a water drainage agency. And so their whole scope, in my opinion, even, you go on their websites and they show all these pictures about all the wetlands they're saving, and they have all this talk about how they're good stewards of the land. It's all garbage. They are a drainage agency, and so even if they give somebody a permit, they don't care what happens downstream to the people that might still get flooded, even if the people upstream get a permit.
I want to go into the Water Security Agency in a little bit. We did request the Water Security Agency to be part of the show today. They declined that offer and instead sent us a statement. I'll read part of that in just a little bit. But I want people to have a better understanding, Sandy, of what you feel like this will mean for your particular piece of land.
Well, when it gets flooded, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when land is flooded, you can't seed it. So does it mean delayed seeding in the spring? Absolutely. Does it mean that some of my land doesn't get seeded in the spring? Absolutely. If there's a big weather event in the summer and the water's coming too fast and in too great a volumes across my land because I've got runs on my land and then the neighbors upstream are all ditching or illegally ditching into those that come across my land, then any crop that has come up, it can be flooded. I don't know the quality of the water that's coming so fast and in such great volumes, because lots of times it can contain fertilizer runoff into the creeks. So the guys upstream, yeah, you said it at the beginning of the show, they want to make more money on their per acre of land, and they're doing it at my expense.
Would there be any compensation for you at all?
There's no compensation. You want to know what they do? The Kelvington C&D levies my land every year, and in the past 10 years, they have taken $30,000 out of my bank account to use on drainage projects. I receive no benefit from those drainage projects. And when I have gone to the Kelvington C&D in the past and said, hey, I think there's some silt buildup in the creek. I think the creek would work better if we got rid of some of that silt. They've said we don't have any money for that.
And just for listeners who don't know what C&D is.
Conservation and Development Authority. And there is absolutely zero conservation in their agenda. They are all about development and drainage.
I'm going to read a little bit of the statement that I got from their Water Security Agency. So it reads, drainage is an important tool for Saskatchewan producers to manage water, but it needs to be done responsibly. The Water Security Agency works with producers to ensure all drainage in Saskatchewan gets approval. Most drainage issues are complex in nature, and before WSA, the Water Security Agency, issues an approval, there are several things which are considered. The project proponent must have permission from downstream landowners consenting to their water passing through their land. This permission is typically documented through a joint application by landowners who are working together on a network project. Larger and more complex drainage network projects can be done through a conservation and development area authority, which is what you're talking about. So how do you see that working in your case?
Well, most of that statement was garbage. Now, is it true that some drainage can be done responsibly? Absolutely. Is it true that there might be some worthwhile drainage? Absolutely. I think you've got some guests on the show that might be able to speak to that. But as far as saying that, they have to get permission from downstream landowners and everybody works cooperatively and, everybody's going to benefit, I can't remember the exact wording, it's absolute garbage. The Water Security Agency is there to drain land, and they are there to help the drainers drain land. And they do nothing to facilitate a conciliatory process.
I want to read one... Sorry, go ahead. Well, I wanted to read one more part, something that about the fee. So recently, this is from their statement as well, the Water Security Agency says that they implemented a new request for assistance, RFA process, with prescribed timelines for resolution. The RFA process is designed to support landowners who are being impacted by unapproved drainage. WSA also implemented a $1,000 refundable filing fee to submit an RFA. The fee is refunded if the drainage complaint is deemed valid. So I wanted to talk about that $1,000 fee because I know that's something that you've been concerned a little bit about. Sandy, what do you make of the Water Security Agency charging $1,000 for people to make a complaint?
Well, it's extortion, right? They're supposed to do their job.
And they say it is refundable if the complaint is deemed valid. And they say that the fee was implemented because nearly 1/3 of complaints weren't about drainage. And they said that means that government resources were used to conduct investigations, which could have been better used to help other clients resolve.
That is garbage. That's garbage. I would take a look at their books because I talked to somebody who worked in the complaint process with the Water Security Agency, and he said 1% of drainage complaints are not valid. 1%. So let them show us the facts that 1/3 of them are nuisance claims. That's absolute garbage. The only reason they're charging it is because they've got too many complaints, right? So how do you stop those complaints? Start charging $1,000.
Do you know anybody who maybe wouldn't make a complaint because the $1,000 up front is a bit too much?
Lots of my neighbors won't make a complaint regardless of the $1,000. They won't make a complaint because of repercussions.
What kind of repercussions are you talking about?
Well, on my farm, I have been harassed and my farm has been vandalized in the past 25 years because of water. And in the past 2 weeks since we've ramped up going to the legislature and talking to CBC and other news agencies, my land has been vandalized again, and we've had to call the police out, and they have agreed that it is deliberate vandalism. So I have neighbors, Do they want to pay the $1,000? No. But they're not going to make a complaint probably anyhow because they don't want to be harassed. They don't want vandalism.
I'm really sorry to hear that, Sandy.
Thank you.
And I imagine that neighbor relationships are so important. And I imagine that there's a lot of people who are hesitant to make a complaint because they don't want to have a negative relationship with their neighbors. I want to put one more thing. There's people on the phones who are trying to get in here, but I want to ask you one more thing before I let you go. And that's that in January of 2025, the WSA launched a new agricultural water stewardship policy that requires wetlands to be retained as part of all drainage projects. And they say that this further mitigates potential impacts to downstream water quality, flooding, and wildlife habitat. How well would you say that this water stewardship policy is working?
Well, first off, garbage again. It is not a water stewardship policy. It is a water drainage policy. And why did they move water underneath agriculture? Why isn't it its own department so that it is independent of agriculture? And, the nonsense about them saying that they have to retain so much on their land, I think you've got a chap that's you're going to be talking to. And, they say that they have to, where does he have it? They have to retain a certain percentage of water on their land. In fact, farmers don't have to. Okay. The WSA says that it will require farmers undertaking drainage projects to keep 40% of the wetlands, 60% in heavily used water areas like the Qu'Appelle, to prevent downstream impacts. However, this is not the case, as the policy actually requires farmers to keep 0% wetland in many parts of Saskatchewan and only 30% in the Qu'Appelle system. So you are talking to a chap there that can explain that a lot better than me.
Sure.
And yeah, I don't want to go into it anymore because I might get some of it wrong.
Well, Sandy, I really appreciate your time today. I know that you went to the legislature hoping to raise your issue. What exactly would you like to see happen?
Well, like we said at the legislature, I don't want to fight with my neighbors. I don't want to fight with the government. I want people to sit down at the same table and all work out a solution. And if you take the expropriation powers away from the C&Ds, that's exactly what would have to happen. They'd have to sit down at a table. To this day, the C&D has never contacted me and said, hey, we want to do a big drainage project. We know you're one of the downstream people. You're going to be negatively impacted. We want to make sure we're being fair to everybody. Same thing with the Water Security Agency. Phone the Water Security Agency, they won't tell you anything. Phone the provincial C&D, the SCDA, they won't tell you anything. Nobody wants to sit down with anybody who might want to not have their land flooded or, as the easement says, submerged, and people who see that there is a value to having trees on your land and wetlands.
Sandy, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Sandy Lowndes is a farmer in the Calvinton area. And if you're seeing a lot of agricultural drainage in your part of the province, you can join the conversation, 1-800-716-2221, or email bluesky@cbc.ca. We're going to go to the phone lines in just a second, but I wanted to read another statement. So we did request an interview with the Saskatchewan Conservation and Development Association, and that was Sandy was referencing her local C&D. And Dana Myers is the executive director. She's not willing to do a live interview on the show, but she sent a statement about what she says are the benefits of responsible drainage in Saskatchewan, and it reads, the Saskatchewan Conservation and Development Association provides technical, engineering, and governance support to conservation and development, C&D boards, and watershed authority boards across the province. Our role is to help ensure that water management projects are designed, maintained, and operated in ways that protect agricultural productivity, surrounding lands, and the broader environment. Good drainage is not simply about removing water. When it's designed and approved properly, it protects farmland, roads, reduces flooding and washouts, improves crop production, and supports healthier, more stable landscapes. Effective water management strengthens rural infrastructure, supports producers, and contributes to a more resilient agricultural economy. SCDA, that's the Saskatchewan Conservation Development Association, works closely with the Water Security Agency and provides its own engineering expertise. Our engineering team works collaboratively with stakeholders to ensure that systems are safe, compliant, built to last, and receive ongoing maintenance or adjustments as required to function effectively. We also provide boards and landowners with the tools, training, and governance support needed to manage water responsibly, legally, and sustainably. And finally, SCDA supports boards by helping them work through the technical and administrative requirements of the approval process outlined in Saskatchewan's Agricultural Water Management Stewardship Policy. We know drainage can be sensitive. Every region has its own history and challenges. That's why SCDA focuses on listening, communication, applying current technical and engineering practices, and helping local boards and communities work together on solutions. So that was a statement from the Saskatchewan Conservation Development Association, who did not want to be live on the show today. We're going to head to Lane, who's in southeast Saskatchewan on the line. Lane, welcome to Blue Sky.
Oh, thank you.
So what's been your experience?
I'm a farmer from southeast Saskatchewan, and Scott Moe's Water Security Agency is not allowing landowners who are not adjacent to the land being drained to file a complaint against the drainer. You can pay WSA's extortion fee of $1,000 if you have land adjacent to the drainage to have the water security assess damage, but if you are further downstream, the WSA will not accept a request for assistance, even though your water is contaminated and your land flooded because you are not directly impacted.
Lane, that's
the
something
WSA
that's something you saw on your own land?
Yep. And the WSA is telling us they are ensuring clean drinking water, but they are not doing water quality testing in or beyond their drainage projects and not doing impact assessments downstream.
So you live downstream from one of these projects. How have you been affected?
Well, for one thing, we were in a drainage project, and we were at the adequate outlet, and we were not in favor of signing the contract because we would be liable for the upstream drainer's drainage because we'd be all considered a group, and they'd also have a lien on our land, and the WSA could put a lien on our land, and WSA could actually add more drainage if you signed that contract. So we didn't sign that contract. And what they did is they moved the adequate outlet just slightly upstream off our land. We actually live further downstream, about 4 or 5 miles. And I asked, when this project initially started, I asked them, did you know that you are endangering my well? And none of them would answer that question. But there's landowners further downstream of me. They're finding the impacts because creeks are deep in places and then they flatten out. So they lose hayland and cropped acres too.
Lane, thank you so much for calling in today.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity.
You bet. Today on Blue Sky, we are talking about illegal ditching. We're talking about agricultural drainage. It's a very widespread practice here in the province, and there are proper channels that you can do. You can drain your land using with permission from the Water Security Agency, but it's also a very big province, and that means that it can be tricky for the organization to investigate all the complaints that might be out there. And we're hearing today from a lot of people who say that this is not working for them. So I wanted to bring in another guest, and that's Chuck Deschamps. He's a recently retired biologist who spent 34 years working with Ducks Unlimited. He lives near Wadena, and he's very familiar with water security policies in this province. Chuck, you've been listening to the show. What stood out to you so far?
Hi, Nicole. And thanks for the opportunity to participate in the conversation.
Thanks for being here.
So I think the issues that have been raised are valid in terms of the current policies and sort of the lack of enforcement we've seen. And that's nothing new. It's been going on since Saskatchewan's been settled. Farmers benefit from drainage. It's a widely practiced development, and we see it all the time, and we've seen it unfortunately ramp up considerably in the last number of years with additional technology, GPS, Landsat. Farmers can figure out exactly where the water runs on their field, and as you said at the beginning of the show, they want to increase production, so making every acre count, not having to drive around wetlands, so it saves them time and those sorts of things. So there's lots of interest in draining more land in Saskatchewan, and so the Water Security Agency has developed some policies to try to assist in that process and create responsible drainage projects, because when drainage happens illegally, it's not done responsibly. It's typically done to get out of the water as fast as possible. And of course, if you happen to be downstream, that can result in flooding, all kinds of other issues. We see roads washed out, grid roads washed out when we have heavy rain events, those sorts of things. So, I think, the conversation so far has been good, and I think the conversation needs to continue.
If you had to hazard a guess, what percentage of farmers would you say are going through the proper legal channels? Can you tell us what the penalty is if people are caught illegally ditching?
Yeah, so generally, I don't have a sense for the entire province, but we know that the vast bulk of drainage that has occurred to date has been done illegally. Even though water belongs to the province, it has since the province was created. They never gave to the landowner the right to drain water. That's always been retained by the province. That's why we have a water security agency. But it's been ignored predominantly by every government that's been in power. Back in the 1980s, because there was so much flooding, they actually brought in drainage regulations that basically grandfathered any existing drainage, but required any new drainage to require approval. And we saw that again in 2015 with more flooding that this current government brought in, saying any drainage that's done, whether it was done 50 years ago or 100 years ago, requires a permit. So everything requires an approval. Unfortunately, it's much easier to do it and beg forgiveness later. So we see illegal drainage happening all the time, and we see impacts happening all the time. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of monitoring and enforcement that goes on, that it predominantly relies on a complaint system.
Is it a fine?
Well, there are fines if water security chooses to go that route. But generally, in most cases, I've never heard of a fine per se. It very rarely happens. In most cases, landowners, if they are confronted with illegal drainage by the government, by water security agent, they're told to either close their ditch or comply, get an approval from their neighbors so they can drain onto them.
Okay. I want to go back to the phone lines. We have Daryl in Kelvington. Daryl, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hello there.
What's on your mind?
Thanks for letting me be on here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I sure can. Go ahead.
So I'm a third generation farmer. This Duck Creek project that we have going on in Kelvington, it's something special, I guess. It's they want to flood 246 acres of a half section of land that I have, and the creek does not cross on my land whatsoever. It's I guess you can say I have a flat there, and they want me to sign this easement, and they can flood it whenever they want, and this easement is forever now. And they have not given me any consultation whatsoever. Very little, if there is. And yeah, I don't know. How do you deal with this? I don't know.
Daryl, what has this done to your relationship with your neighbors?
Oh well, you're the bad guy. The C&D is making it so that the farmers are the bad, the ones that are draining onto you are the good guys, and the ones that are getting the water are the bad guys. It's terrible. It's why should I be paying for somebody else's upstream? It's for them to gain more acres and I lose acres. It's dumb the way this is set up.
Are people tempted to just continue draining, like people drain onto your land and then you just move it onto someone else's land?
That doesn't bother anybody to drain onto somebody else. Most farmers have track hose and scrapers and cats, and they're better than most road builders nowadays. They know how to move dirt and get rid of water. Yeah.
I'd like to. We have another question. Maybe, do you think that? Chuck, maybe that you can help answer this. Do you think that illegal drainage will impact the Hatfield aquifer, which is what most people in Qu'Appelle get their water from? That was a question from a listener.
Well, one of the things that wetlands do, and they provide lots of benefits to society, one of the things they do is recharge our groundwater supplies. So with drainage, whether it's illegal or legal, the more wetlands we lose, the less groundwater recharge we get. So yeah, it will affect groundwater supplies.
Daryl, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before I let you go?
I wish I was better at speaking at this because it's unfair. It's totally unfair how 6 people in this C&D group can wreck a person's life. Like
Daryl, don't be so hard on yourself. You've done a very good job of helping us understand exactly what this has meant in your life. So I appreciate you picking up the phone and calling us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another guest that I'd just like to bring into this conversation because there might be other questions that our guests or our callers have that he can help as well. So Colin Whitfield is the Associate Professor in the School of Environment and Sustainability at the Global Institute for Water Security at the University of Regina. And Colin, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
You've been patiently listening along so far. What's stood out to you?
I think what stands out to me is that this seemed to be a little bit more localized, and my sense is it's become a lot more widespread in the time that I've been living in the province and working on wetlands and trying to understand some of the consequences of wetland drainage.
Now we've been getting quite a few questions from folks, and I'm just going to read an email here from Delwyn. He says, our family farm a quarter that is 60% grazing land and 40% cropland. Through the years, we suddenly could not use the grazing area. Plus, for a few years, we lost about 40 croppable acres, all because of a sudden increase in neighbors illegally ditching water off their land onto ours. Apparently, they have the right to gain, while the rest of us have to take a big loss. From research, I have only found 3 farmers in our RM who have legal water reduction permits. My father got the first legal water reduction permit. When my father and I were doing the permit work, my father stated to me that we are going to follow the law. Following the water reduction laws only injured us far greater than the illegal ditchers. So if you were to hazard a guess as to what percentage of farmers are going through legal channels, do you have any sense of what's going on in the province right now?
I wouldn't say I have a good sense of that, so I would trust Chuck's expertise on this. From the conversations I have, from the historical illegal drainage that's been quantified, my sense is that it's the vast majority of drainage that occurs is done without the proper permitting.
Tell us about the work that you're doing right now. What are you researching?
Yeah, so for a number of years, we've been part of a team that has been trying to answer a question really the question was, which wetlands must we keep, is kind of how it started. And this was a question that a lot of different partner organizations had on their minds. This included watershed organizations and some community organizations, as well as provincial agencies. And so we tried to develop a approach where we could quantify some of the changes that might occur at different levels of wetland drainage. And so, we've worked on that for the last 7 or so years, have some interesting results to support the conversations around this. Unfortunately, the results point to some pretty wide and large impacts associated with wetland drainage.
What are you most concerned about?
Well, I think there are big concerns around the amount of drainage. So if I look back at the numbers that were mentioned earlier in the call, in this 40 to 60% range, the impacts we could expect to see from that would be stream flow events, large magnitude stream flow events that might have happened every 40 years. We would expect to happen about every 5 years now, with about 50% drainage. Similarly, wetlands are really important for holding nutrients and trapping them and releasing some of them back to the atmosphere. We would approximately double nutrient export to our lakes and rivers at a threshold of about 50% drainage. And then we also have widespread impacts to biota. 2/3 of dabbling ducks would be lost at a 50% drainage threshold. Other avian species associated with wetlands would be similarly impacted. Other work that's gone on in recent years shows the importance of wetlands for migratory insects that would move from wetlands to our river systems and help in the food chain there, supporting fish populations and higher trophic levels, for example. So there's a lot of impacts here. And what we found is that they start at low levels of drainage. As low as 10%, we see these impacts start to accrue. So when we're talking about 40 to 60% wetland drainage as a target under the agricultural water stewardship policy, that has some fairly significant and large impacts that would impact rivers, lakes, the health of our ecosystems, recreational opportunities, drinking water treatment processes. There's a lot linked in there. So
that is a lot. And you're doing this research. Who is listening to the results of your research? Is the government consulting with you? Are you sharing this with people who are in the decision-making roles? Water drinking, water quality, all of these things are very important.
Yeah, certainly it's been shared with our partner organizations. As I mentioned kind of at the start, we had about 40 different organizations across the prairie provinces that we were in communication with, including the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency. So we've shared that. It does not appear that it's made a meaningful impact on the conversation. But it has been shared. I would say when I look at the agricultural water stewardship policy, the targets are around the amount of drainage that will occur. But what is not there are targets around how much nutrient export might be acceptable, or how much habitat we want to make sure that we have, or what's a permissible change in stream flows when we move this water and have higher levels of water in our streams. That hasn't been defined in the policy. So we have a situation where there's a clear target on what the drainage is, but there's not a clear target as far as these other factors that are mentioned, but no real tangible way to ensure that those are protected and the resilience of the system is protected.
We'll go back to the phone lines in just a minute here, but Chuck, I just wanted to bring you in here as well, because we are talking about Saskatchewan right now, but obviously we have prairie neighbors and they have wetlands and they have similar things happening. So Chuck Deschamps, who is a retired biologist with Ducks Unlimited, Chuck, I was wondering, how does Saskatchewan compare with, let's say, in Alberta or Manitoba when it comes to wildlife policy?
So you mean wetland policy?
Sorry. Wetland policy.
Yeah. So Alberta and Manitoba both have wetland policies. They have for some time now. And Saskatchewan remains the only province without a wetland conservation policy. What we have is a drainage stewardship policy right now. And so in Manitoba and Alberta, they're not stopping drainage. You can still drain wetlands, provided you're mitigating those impacts, as Colin alluded to before. So in Alberta, for example, say you wanted to drain X number of acres of wetlands, somebody would look at that, they would score what you're wanting to drain, and then come back to you and say, you need to restore the same acres or more acres of wetlands or less acres of wetlands in the same area. And that same model was used or is used sometimes in Saskatchewan, developed by Ministry of Environment, for highways. And so I know when highways, expand roadways or whatever, they do mitigate. And so they might destroy, say, 3 or 4 acres of wetlands. They're going to mitigate and put maybe 6 or 7 acres of wetlands back somewhere else. So we don't have that with this current stewardship policy. There is no mitigation, as Colin mentioned. All the existing drainage that's currently there will be permitted. That's Water Security said they're not going to restore or want any wetlands to be restored. And they're going to allow more drainage on top of that. So, it's definitely not a conservation policy at all. And we're still waiting to see what a conservation policy might look like, especially given the high levels of drainage that we're going to see in some watersheds.
I mean, Sandy talked about it earlier, but she was wondering why water is under agriculture and not under environment. Is that a shift? Like, you've been in this field for 30-something years. Did you see that shift happen? And what do you see as the consequences of lumping water in with agriculture as opposed to it being under the environment?
Yeah, well, originally, when the whole discussion started back in, when Saskatchewan was first founded, it was under agriculture,
Okay.
and then later shifted to environment. And I think most people, especially if you're looking at impacts and impacts to the environment, water quality, those sorts of things, those are definitely sort of environmental impacts. So, it did make sense that those would be under environment. But when the Water Security Agency was created, they pulled together people from agriculture and people from environment to create a one-stop shop agency with the goal of having sort of everything under one roof. But unfortunately, as you've heard, environment seems to be at the bottom of the table, and it seems to be more of a development policy than a conservation policy.
I want to go to the phone lines. Paul Emile is from north of Nipawin. Paul Emile, what do you want to add to our conversation today?
Well, a couple points here. First of all, C and D, well, that's an oxymoron. I mean, there's completely different definitions in terminology. One of the most popular or growing in popularity machines on the big farms is a track hoe. Track hoes are used to take down trees, shelter belts especially, and drain sloughs. And I hate to pick on the big farmer, but it seems like it's happening more and more with the larger farms that have the large equipment that I've heard the term didn't want to go around the sloughs, and they don't care, and they affect everybody. When you drain sloughs and wetlands, and that was been mentioned before, it affects your water table, the level of your water table, which means it affects the wells of all the people in the area. We're in an area close to, surrounded with a lot of forest land, forest belts, and it's becoming more and more difficult to quickly find water to fight fires because all the sloughs and wetlands have been drained. And it's not so much in the springtime that, with the snow melt and the water goes and, okay, everybody gets to work. It's when you have an event like 2 years ago in June, we had 12 inches of rain. That causes a big problem because there are no more sloughs and wetlands to absorb, that act as a sponge for all this runoff. And so if you're at the bottom of the run, like we are, you have a big flooded hay fields, flooded gardens, flooded everything. So I wish the government would understand and have a policy on water in general. They do not, and I really wonder if they ever care because they never discuss it. And I'm sorry, but the opposition does not seem to understand or care about it either. So first thing has to be done is have a water policy in this province, and in a lot of cases it's a little too late already. It's like the South wants to be like the North. And talking grain belt, the South wants to be like the North and have a bit more water, and the North wants to be more like the South and have a lot drier conditions. So it's quite a situation.
Paul Emile, thanks for joining the conversation today.
You're welcome.
We'll go to Sandra. She's in southeast Saskatchewan. Sandra, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on. I just wanted to share a couple of quotes from what the WSA has told me. One of them is, "We are the WSA and we can allow any drainage we want." Another one quite recently was, "The Water Security Act is only a secondary legislation, so we don't really follow that." And to why they don't allow more people to complain is, "Our policy to limit the request for assistance comes from our interpretation of the definition of the word petitioner in the Act." They have actually made up their own definition for legal words from the Act in order to allow more drainage.
Sandra, thank you so much for calling in today. There's a bunch of people, so I'm trying to get through as many as possible, but I really appreciate you listening and for calling in today. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
I'd like to go to Outlook, where we have Ryan. Ryan, you apparently, I'm told that you work with Irrigation Saskatchewan. So tell me a little bit about what you're bringing to this conversation today.
Hey there. So I work with Irrigation Saskatchewan. I'll just quickly talk about how we think irrigation could be a tool to mitigate some of the impact of drainage. So you've got water going down a creek and maybe nutrients. If you hold that water back, which is good agricultural water management, and then you irrigate that on the land, you'd be mitigating some of those impacts of the flooding and some of the nutrient problems. And so that's something that we as an organization are actually working with SCDA and the WSA on, in terms of how we can, you need the right topography and you need a few factors to work out in your favor, but we feel like that could be an opportunity to capture, still allow people to drain, but capture some more economic value from that.
That's really interesting, Ryan. I appreciate you calling in with that today. Could you, we're coming up to the end of the show, but do you have an example where you've seen this work?
Yep, there's a few in the province. A really easy one is actually the Davidson A&W right behind there. There's a big reservoir. Next time anybody's driving by, take a look on the right.
I will.
You'll see some irrigation pivots. On the east, you'll see some irrigation pivots there, and there's a bunch of drainage that runs into that reservoir.
And how does that relate to ditching?
So the drainage there's upstream landowners who are draining into a creek that runs into that reservoir that gets held back, but holding it back and using that water for irrigation mitigates some of the flooding or downstream potential impacts.
Okay, well, I will check that out next time I go through. Thanks for the hot tip.
Thank you.
Okay, that was Ryan in Outlook, and he's with Sask Irrigation. We're coming up to the end of the show. I want to make sure, Colin, that I can get to ask you about the current research. I know that you have a research paper coming out any day now, and you're looking at different impacts. Can you just tell us a little bit give us a sneak peek into some of that research that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'll touch on that. And this relates to the point made by one of the earlier callers about this challenge of having to navigate around wetlands and some added fuel cost for that. So a team based across the prairies with both the U of R, the U of S, and Ducks Unlimited and the National Farmers Union tried to quantify for the first time what the carbon emissions associated with wetland drainage are. And it's, again, a fairly significant number. It would amount to about 5% or more of the total industrial emissions from that sector in the region. So it's a large number of greenhouse gas emissions associated with draining into wetlands. That is another concern that should be in this conversation when decisions are made around appropriate levels of wetland drainage.
There is so much. I think I can probably squeeze in one more caller. Gary in Broadview, you're going to have to be short but sweet. Let's go, Gary.
Yes, hi. Thanks for the opportunity. I think you have to run a couple more shows, then we can really have...
I think a week of programming, yep.
Yes, easily. No, seriously, we have no other place to talk about this openly. There has to be an ombudsman board or some kind of ombudsman committee set up, because people don't realize the political party is going to toss this around like a football. The bureaucrats run our province. People forget that. The bureaucrats run our province. We need somebody to crack the whip on the bureaucrats on this issue, and we need some kind of an authority that's above the bureaucrats, because our political people can't do it. You can, whatever party stripe you want to look at, they haven't done it in the past. And I want to look at the water quality. Now the extra amount of herbicides and fertilizers that are put on soil nowadays, if the province owns the water, give me the name. I want someone to give a name where you can get a water quality test, because in other countries they test the drainage, what's coming off to do with the inputs that crop production is. And if the province owns it, they're responsible for enforcing something. And I think that's hilly-nilly not enforced, because just look around all the dying poplar and shelter belts around the edge of these fields. The fellas are spraying all kind of times of weather. whatever windy and rainy and whatever else. And there's got to be effects on our water quality, not just the drainage, but actually what's coming off the fields. And that sort of, I think, ties on to our topic today.
Thank you, Gary. If there's other people who didn't get a chance, I'm going to give the talkback number right now. That's 1-800-661-7540. I've been joined today by Chuck Deschamps, who is a retired biologist with Ducks Unlimited. Colin Whitfield is Associate Professor in the School of Environment and Sustainability at the Global Institute of Water Security at the University of Saskatchewan. Thank you to you both.